Night and Fog in Japan is a 1960 film directed by Nagisa Oshima, which uses the backdrop of a wedding between two political activists to explore the internal contradictions of the leftist student movement during the AMPO struggles of the 1950s and early 60s. The film begins with a confrontation at this comrade's wedding, prompting attendees to delve into memories of their past activism against the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. What begins as a pure pursuit of reform by idealistic student organizations gradually becomes corrupted by personal ambitions and distorted objectives. High-ranking members of the Student Alliance demand blind obedience, while new political factions manipulate behind the scenes. Militants focus solely on violent protest, and opportunists take advantage of the chaos. Nihilists struggle to maintain their ideals, feeling increasingly constrained. Amidst mutual recriminations, the revolutionary momentum stalls. The film concludes without resolving the disputes, as activists continue to be arrested and student leaders revert to their old platitudes. So, how did this AMPO protest start and end? In class, we briefly touched on the basics of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, so this video will take you deeper into the entire process and outcome of the AMPO struggle. In 1945, following Japan's defeat in World War II, millions of Japanese soldiers demobilized and returned home. U.S. troops, as victors, occupied Japan, initiating a 7-year period of military governance. However, prolonged occupation was not a viable long-term strategy for the United States, representing the United Nations. Under military rule, resentment towards the occupying forces, known as GHQ, grew among the Japanese public. Meanwhile, national liberation movements were thriving in East Asia. Direct military governance became an unprofitable deal for the U.S., which led the Western world to plan a permanent peace treaty and military collaboration with Japan. Thus, in 1951, after coordination with its allies, the U.S. signed the San Francisco Treaty and the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty with Japan, inaugurating a new era. This original security treaty, undoubtedly a dictatorial treaty for Japan, required Japan to recognize the legitimacy of U.S. forces stationed there for the peace and security of East Asia and the international community, and to provide bases for these forces, which, notably, did not ensure Japan's national defense. In other words, Japan became a part of the Western Cold War machine, but its own defense was not guaranteed. The signing of the Security Treaty thus sparked a nationwide wave of opposition. The anti-base movement became the undercurrent of Japanese social movements in the 1950s. 7 years later, the Prime Minister Nobusuke Kishi, a right-wing representative of the Liberal Democratic Party and a former bureaucratic reformer, took over the roles of party president and prime minister from the ailing Prime Minister Tanzan Ishibashi. After winning a political battle through a cabinet reshuffle among several strategies, the ambitious Kishi sought to fundamentally change Japan's status and normalize the nation. This normalization would inevitably require amending the pacifist constitution, but recognizing the magnitude of this task, he chose to focus first on revising the old U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. In September 1958, the Kishi cabinet announced its priority to revise the treaty and launched negotiations with the U.S. Continuing to compromise, since decoupling from the U.S. was impractical, Kishi opted instead to strengthen integration with the U.S., enhance Japan's position in the Cold War, and accelerate its rearmament. This led to a new mutual security U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. When news of this reached Japan, It caused a public uproar. For left-wing organizations like the Socialist Party, this treaty ignored the pacifist constitution and led Japan on a path to rearmament, demanding strong resistance. The following year, under the leadership of the Socialist Party and the General Council of Trade Unions, the largest post-war civic alliance was formed, comprising 134 civic groups and 1.32 million people, called the National Congress to block the revision of the Security Treaty. Another civilian organization, the All-Japan Federation of Student Self-Government Associations, quickly joined the stage of the AMPO struggle. Japanese right-wing groups also disapproved of the new treaty, believing it did not enhance Japan's normalization but instead bound it more deeply to the U.S. As a result, both left and right-wing organizations even united to protest against the creation of the new treaty. In order to sign the new U.S.-Japan Security Treaty before President Eisenhower's visit to Japan, the Kishi cabinet employed various methods, even undermining the post-war democratic system established. The Liberal Democratic Party convened a special House of Representatives Security Committee on May 19, attempting to pass the new treaty by May 20. However, under the delaying tactics of the Socialist Party, no results were achieved until late at night on the same day. In response, the Kishi government resorted to almost Nazi-like measures, dispatching 600 police officers and a large number of underworld figures to openly expel opposition members from the Congress. With only Liberal Democratic Party supporters remaining, the new security treaty was forcibly passed. Kishi's gamble quickly led to new political turmoil. The next morning, a large crowd spontaneously surrounded the National Diet building to protest against the government. 3 former prime ministers from non-mainstream factions of the Liberal Democratic Party and the Democratic Socialist Party also demanded Kishi's immediate resignation. At this point, the AMPO struggle transformed from a civic, student, and worker movement into a nationwide movement. From May 20 to June, unions launched a major strike. On June 10, Eisenhower's White House press secretary James Hagerty arrived in Japan to pave the way for the future presidential visit, but his car was surrounded by angry crowds on the street. Ultimately, he was evacuated by a U.S. military helicopter. The Kishi government immediately responded, contacting numerous patriotic groups to prepare to violently suppress the protests. 5 days later, the All-Student Federation's assault on the National Diet building clashed with Kishi's patriotic groups, causing many to be seriously injured. That evening, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department's riot squad also joined the conflict, violently beating students at the main entrance of the National Diet building. At this point, a turning point in the AMPO struggle occurred. Michiko Keiga, a female student from Tokyo University, died at the hands of the riot squad, an event that was the origin of the internal contradictions among the leftist students depicted in the Night and Fog wedding scene. The tragedy of the female student's death exacerbated the situation. Even media outlets that supported the Liberal Democratic Party had to change their stance. Anti-Kishi government protests expanded from Tokyo to nationwide, with the largest rally attracting up to 330,000 people. Eisenhower had to cancel his visit to Japan. The Kishi government also had to announce its resignation on June 16, taking responsibility for the chaos. However, the protests did not substantially affect the new U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. Even on the day before the treaty took effect, hundreds of thousands surrounded the National Diet, hoping to somehow prevent the treaty from taking effect. Protesters stayed until midnight, knowing that the treaty would automatically take effect. But with the treaty's enactment and the Kishi government's resignation, the movement gradually lost its focus and dissipated. With the inauguration of the new Prime Minister Hayato Ikeda, the government adopted a more moderate approach to the opposition wave. It indefinitely shelved amendments to the pacifist constitution and announced a national income doubling plan, shifting the country's energy from political strife to economic development. However, the social divisions sparked by the Ampo struggle did not disappear. The failure of the Ampo struggle led to splits within the left due to political dissatisfaction and responsibility differentiation, with the previously united All-Student Federation breaking into different ideological student organizations, some of which became increasingly radical, including the famous Japanese Red Army. Returning to the film Night and Fog in Japan, Nagisa Oshima, Through the Mouth of a Fugitive, recounts that stormy history. This segment is characterized by expressionism, highlighting the severity of the student movement. Around the world, student movements are generally the same. They use passion and blood to awaken the slumbering masses, but at the moment dawn arrives, they fade away like stars in the daytime. Under the sunlight, how many people remember those who willingly became candles in the quiet night for you?